Hey everyone, welcome to Sportly. I'm Porama, Kavita's producer. Kavita's off today because it's her birthday, but we are so excited to bring you this episode. We are collaborating with the Athletics podcast Full Time, a show about women's soccer. It's hosted by Tamerra Griffin and Jillian Sakovitz. Tamerra is a women's soccer writer at The Athletic whose work centers on equity and the globalization of soccer, while Jillian is a veteran broadcaster who has covered the sport's biggest tournaments like the World Cup and the Olympics. In this episode, Tamerra and Jillian set the stage for the 2027 FIFA Women's World Cup in Brazil. They break down how qualifiers work and examine disparity in resources and opportunities across countries. They are also joined by their producer, Theo Lloyd Hughes. It's a conversation about who is afforded access, what contributes to the growth in women's game, and who gets left behind. I hope you enjoy hearing from Jillian, Tamerra, and Theo. Kavita will be back with a new episode next week.
It's crazy. This is crazy. This number of spots of Asia, Africa, and Oceania, and that equals one continent, 3 continents on one side and one on the other side. Like literally, if you were to field players, that's what it would look like. And that is so tilted. These kinds of disproportionate and unequal looking opportunities end up stalling the growth in a lot of these continents and the countries within them.
Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to Full Time. I'm your host today, Jillian Sakovitz. On this show, we are going to be setting the table. So get your forks, your knives, your napkins, your placemats, your plates, all of it, because we are setting the table for Brazil 2027. The World Cup for the women may seem far away, but the journey has already begun. So today we discuss what you should know, what you should care about in the weeks and months ahead. A lot to get you excited about coming up in March alone. A year from now, we will know the 32 teams of the 179 nations available to compete in the World Cup. For now, we know just one, and that is the host nation, Brazil. But before we get to the rest of today's show to celebrate Black History Month, like we've been doing on every episode of Full Time during the month of February, we've had a trivia question for you. Here is today's. Who was the player that in 2013 scored an iconic goal for the U.S. women's national team in a friendly against Canada and then celebrated by placing one finger over her mouth and shushing the home crowd at BMO Field in Toronto? We will, as always, be revealing the answer at the end of the show. If you want to submit your own Black History trivia question or let us know some fun facts that you've come across, hit us up in the DMs at TA Fulltime or shoot us an email at fulltime@theathletic.com. All right, to get into all things world soccer and the beginning of our journey to the 2027 Women's World Cup, I now bring in my podcast people. First, we start with The Athletics' Tamerra Griffin, who, Tamerra, I don't know, outside of the one time we got to hang out in a bar in New York, if I've ever been as geographically close to you as I am today.
I know. I can feel your radiance from up here in Northern California. And even though I'm very sad and I definitely have the vicarious uncertainty of canceled flights and travel changes due to weather, I am glad that you're on the Best Coast while you figure out, not you, the airlines, figure out the rest of your itinerary. It's nice to be next door.
The Best Coast thing, I'm always like, I don't know. But in February, the West Coast is 100% the Best Coast. For our listeners, I was on Sunday Night Soccer last night on the sideline, which was loads of fun at the LA Galaxy hosting New York City. But I don't know what they've called it now, but I heard words like blizzard, snow bomb, that is all unraveling in New York City. So I am stuck in Los Angeles, but I'll tell you, there's worse places to be stuck 100%. Than Manhattan Beach. I have not seen a ray of sunshine in legitimately 2 months. So I'm thrilled. One day of sun is good. If I'm stuck here for more than that, we might have issues. But it has been a welcomed Monday. An unexpected Monday, but a welcomed Monday. And then coming to us from 9 hours in the other direction from the UK is producer Theo. Hi, Theo.
Hello. What a pleasure to see you both on this international week.
I'm just settling into my seat a little more.
Okay, you should be. Because we are going to we'll start off simple. We're going to start off in CONCACAF, the home confederation, of course, for
God's confederation.
for the United States that encompasses the nations in North and Central America and the Caribbean. It's important to note that while the U.S. has been playing exclusively friendly matches since the 2024 Olympics, that's not the case for all teams and federations. So yes, CONCACAF qualifiers for the 2027 World Cup have already begun. So who wants to break down how CONCACAF qualifying works? For the listeners to know, there will be 4 teams from CONCACAF that move on into the World Cup. 2 move in from the playoffs. So there could be a minimum of 4 teams from CONCACAF that go to the 2027 World Cup, a maximum of 6. But P.S., of course, this includes the United States and Canada. Tamerra, how different does life look like for the rest of CONCACAF when you move beyond the U.S. and the Canadian women's national teams?
I feel compelled to, I know this is not how the actual table for qualifying is going to look, but when we're talking about differences in situation, differences in preparation, differences even in expectation of which team should advance, I feel compelled to include Mexico in the conversation with the U.S. and Canada, just because while it has been a minute since they've competed in a World Cup, if you have had an opportunity to watch this team in their friendlies, if you've had an opportunity to follow individual players who are regularly getting called up to the Mexican women's national team, you know that these are capital C contenders. And so for me, I'm putting those 3 in one sort of bucket. And then after that, it gets really disparate. I think that you have teams like that, and then you have, of course, some small nations, especially in the Caribbean, who have a lot of might, who have a lot of tenacity, who have a lot of desire, that unfortunately rarely matches up with the investment that they get from their federations to actually realize their potential. So in CONCACAF, whether they're friendlies or qualifying games, you still get a fair number of double-digit score lines to shutouts on the other side. There is a clear delineation between teams that have what I think most people would consider a legitimate shot at qualifying for the World Cup, of making a dent in CONCACAF in general, and those that are still building, we'll say, generously. I think CONCACAF is one of the more, well, I guess that's not even necessarily true. I think the size of CONCACAF, the number of nations that are in CONCACAF, is what makes that range feel a bit wider. But the truth is, we see this range all over the world.
It's probably one of the most fascinating confederations in the world. I think we joke about CONCACAF a lot. It's got a hell of a reputation.
Yeah.
But it really is fascinating to have, you know, nations the size of the United States to nations the size of the Marshall Islands, all hypothetically competing for one goal. Obviously, you know, Jill, you come in with this great question of sort of what is life like for the teams outside the USA, Canada? And it's very different. Tamerra brings up Mexico. Mexico is seriously invested in their women's team. They have probably a top 5 league in the world since 2017, the Liga MX Femenil. These are things that most nations in CONCACAF do not have. So while qualifying has begun for, I want to say, 29 nations, I believe, are in the group stage right now. There'll be more games this week while the US and Canada are playing the She Believes Cup. We will have CONCACAF World Cup qualifiers going on for 29 nations. Some of these nations do not have professional leagues. Some of these nations do not have leagues at all. And so what you're seeing is a huge diversity in programs, in resources, in star players, in professionalization, in quality. But I do think maybe the positive look of what's going on in CONCACAF outside the USA and Canada is growth. I think that's the only thing we can probably say. Whilst, you know, Tamerra mentions there's a lot of different nations out there, we hopefully are seeing all these nations get better. And I think what CONCACAF is doing by having this early group stage where there's 6 different groups, each team plays 3 to 4 games, and then the 6 group winners go through to play quarterfinals with the USA and Canada this upcoming November. what they're trying to do is give more preliminary rounds, more preliminary games for these teams to build programs, to build resources. Unfortunately, on the men's side, you will see more games. You will see more camps. You will see more friendlies. So there's still a long way to go. But what we're seeing is grassroots at the end of the day.
Yeah, the resources and the investment just are not there for confederations ranging from Costa Rica to El Salvador to Trinidad and Tobago, et cetera, et cetera. It's such a wide-ranging spot. Mm-hmm. Okay, so looking at, let's look ahead for a moment, and then I want to look backwards. If we're filling those three buckets of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico as what should be sure things, more or less, for qualifying, what is the kind of next tier in your eyes of the nations that can really make a run in CONCACAF?
I mean, let's talk about Haiti.
Let's talk about Haiti.
Haiti have Melchi Dumonet, for listeners that don't know, the Lyon attacking midfielder, Ballon d'Or nominee, one of the best players in the world. And if you have Melchi Dumonet, you're in a good spot. Mm-hmm. So anyone listening to this podcast will know some of the issues Haiti has geopolitically, and that obviously bleeds into sport and culture. And in particular, women's football is going to be really affected by that. Haiti do not play their home games in Haiti. But they have Melchi Dumonet, and they just hired former U.S. Women's National Team coach, former Brazil coach, former Sweden head coach, Pia Sundhage as the head coach. So yeah, Tamerra, Haiti, right? They've got to be one of the names we're looking at in CONCACAF as saying a team that could break out in this World Cup qualifying.
100%. I'm also thinking of, and we need to shout out Noelia Mondesir, who plays for Seattle Reign.
How can we forget? Just signed a new contract. Or just had an option exercised, I should say.
Yes, important distinction.
Meg Linehan is out
Sophia
there. She's Meg Linehan is out there,
her, shaking her
saying,
fist.
Hey, she didn't sign a new contract. She had an option exercised.
I'm sure even Salem is shaking his fist at that because he knows by now. No, but I shout her out not only because she's clearly a quality player, but I do think that if we put ourselves in, qualifying land. Mm-hmm. Not to say that Melchi Dumonet is an easy player to shut down, but she is a player that any team in CONCACAF, if they face Haiti, will go into the game knowing that she's going to be a capital P problem. I don't know why I'm obsessed with capitals and lower cases right now. We're going with it. And I think in those moments, it's players like Mondesir who will be an important outlet if we can assume that Melchi will be shut down. So they have a quality team. I really enjoyed watching them at the 2023 World Cup. They're a team that you just hope in those moments in between major tournaments that they're continuing to build. And it's one of those classic colonialism diaspora stories where you look at Haiti's roster and you see that a lot of those players are playing their trade professionally for French clubs. I know that, Theo, you have a lot of thoughts about Suriname, and it's a similar thing with them developing their players in the Netherlands. And so I have high hopes for Haiti, who, funny enough, is playing Suriname in this qualifying stage. But we have to also talk about Jamaica, I think. This is a team that has long held a lot of people's desires for improvement, for progress, specifically for the Jamaican Federation to take them seriously in a way that is sustainable and not only every 4 years when everyone's watching because we have a World Cup. Again, top to bottom, quality players when they are not protesting against their federation and are actually showing up for national team duty, which, of course, is going to be a huge question mark between now and the end of the year. But I would say Jamaica and Haiti for me, and, maybe Panama as well, sort of occupied that next tier of, I had been watching the America's Next Top Model documentary, so the whole "We Are All Rooting for You" is really top of mind right now, more than usual. Yeah, I know. I can't even.
We got to park it. We got to park it. Yeah.
That's been flooding my social media feed, by the way.
I mean, the Americas part holds up for CONCACAF, at least.
CONCACAF's next top nation.
But also, don't get me started because I'll just.
No. Also, shout out to Cam Simmons, friend of the show, who shared a little bit of her insight as to what it was like to play in that last 2023 World Cup.
It's over! The Jamaica women's football team have been disbanded, unfunded and ignored. Not anymore.
Yeah, I do. It was definitely after the Brazil game when that final whistle blew, it was still 0-0. They had a free kick in like the 89th minute, right outside the box. And our keeper, it went right into her hands and she went to the ground. And then the ref still hadn't blown the whistle. But then as soon as he did, I just remember like running right onto the field in immediate tears, hugging my teammates. But then I went and found my dad in the stands, and then same thing, like we were hugging each other, tears were flowing. My grandma was there as well. Just that moment, like he came all the way from Richmond, Virginia. My grandma came from Jamaica to be there with me in Australia. And so doing that and then making history, like that moment was just super, super special.
The tectonic plates of women's football are shifting. The gap has been squeezed between the historic dominant nations and a new, well-coached, well-organised, talented generation that are spreading the global game.
All right, so I had a sense you were going to bring up Haiti. I was hoping for Jamaica, and I think that's because when you kind of start to like whet your appetite for World Cup and you look beyond your comfort zone and the teams and the players that you know, there's stories that can kind of like ignite your flame of who else am I rooting for? And I think probably because I just came off the Olympics, like, yeah, of course you're rooting for the US, but then there's other people and faces and countries you start to root for. Haiti, of course, was one of the breakout teams at the last World Cup in qualifying for that one. They beat Mexico 3-0. In Mexico, Tamerra, really moving them into another tier.
Well, I think for me personally, I am pretty much always I'm rooting for everybody Black. So already they have that sort of point in the bucket. But I also think, as Theo mentioned, about the geopolitical context of Haiti's women's national team competing in anything before we even get to a World Cup.
Yeah.
And the significance of that, considering that they can't even play, as you mentioned also, Theo, home games in Haiti.
They play their home games in the Dominican Republic, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I think even if you remove the history of Haiti, the revolutionary significance of a country like that, anytime you encounter a team that has quality, that has passion and tenacity, and is overcoming uniquely significant systemic barriers to even show up on the pitch, I think that is like at the top of the sort of ingredients list or the top of the recipe, top line of the recipe to fall in love with the team. Because at the end of the day, we're falling in love with stories. That's what draws us to players. That's what draws us to teams and hits the narrative. I also think that in addition to them being a great team, that they could, I've been thinking a lot about sort of like sister national teams. And by that, I mean national teams that have parallels on other continents and in other confederations. And even though Haiti is extremely unique as a country, I think that their success can set a real precedent for what is possible when you invest. And I know, for example, Melchi Dumornay has spoken out about the political situation in Haiti in the past and has called for change, which is not something that we see that often in the women's game, especially when a national team player is talking about their country. It's different when they're talking about their club or, growing the women's game professionally. But I just think that there is and has historically been so much possibility in Haiti that anytime they're doing something important, we need to be paying attention because history tells us that big things happen. And it's just a country that I think has the potential to like move tectonic plates if they're given the opportunity. So that's what makes Haiti kind of singular for me. And the fact that they have one of the best players in the world who's kind of at the prime of her career, I would say right now, just makes it all the more compelling.
I think the arrival of Beatrice Haga is a serious moment of intent for this. But I think, again, while we kind of grab the listener and say, hey, the She Believes Cup is going on, but there's some seriously big matches happening around the world this week, we should talk about Suriname because a bit like some of these other diaspora nations, they've brought in a lot of Dutch professional players from Holland, which I know is something the men's team have done well. I think they're actually in the playoff for the Men's World Cup, Suriname. And this women's team in the Suriname, Mark de Vries, the head coach, is really, really kind of competitive. They're currently top of their group with Haiti, a game in hand. They're going to meet this week. And it's just, that game could define both of those teams' next 2 years.
Yeah.
This one game in a qualifier that, not enough people will be paying attention to. I'm not even sure how it will be broadcast. I imagine probably as part of CONCACAF's package with CBS in the States. But it's games like that where there's just so many amazing players, so many stories. These players, again, often for countries like Haiti, have so much on their shoulders. They're more than just athletes. I just think, it's going to be an amazing week, an amazing year of qualifiers, and you drill down in one of these games, and there's just so much beneath the surface.
All right, we're going to put a bow on CONCACAF for now because there's other federations we have to talk about. All right, so let's start by talking about how many spots at the 2027 World Cup each region is going to get. We've discussed CONCACAF. Let's move on now to the rest of the world. Asia, 6 spots plus 2 in the playoffs. Africa, 4 spots plus 2 in the playoffs. South America, 2 spots plus 2 in the playoffs, plus Brazil gets an automatic bid as the host country. Oceania gets 1 spot plus 1 spot in the playoffs. And finally, Europe with a whopping 11 spots plus 1 spot in the playoffs. When you hear this breakdown of what it is going to look like of the 32 teams at the 2027 World Cup, Tamerra, what is your biggest takeaway?
That breakdown to me is such a reflection of the sort of paradox of world football, which is on one side of the pitch, the metaphorical pitch, you have the people who make the game, who historically made the game. And then on the other side, you have the people who called the shots in that game. And that is roughly how I view UEFA. I mean, it's crazy. This is crazy. 11. Some of these, you add up this number of spots of Asia, Africa, and Oceania, and that equals 1 continent, 3 continents on one side and 1 on the other side. Like literally, if you were to field players, that's what it would look like. And that is so tilted. And it's not reflective to me of the way the game is growing. I know that oftentimes when we talk about progress really in any capacity, there is that feeling of lagging behind, institutions lagging behind reality. And I understand the reasons why that's the case. But it wasn't, and I've known this, like I have been aware of the number of spots available for each continent. But there's something about looking at these numbers that just does something to me. And it just feels unfair. It feels unfair. It feels unfortunate. And I think that these kinds of disproportionate and unequal looking opportunities end up stalling the growth in a lot of these continents and the countries within them.
Yeah, you can't help but do a double take when you see in 2026 in the modern game, Europe with 11 spots and in an entire continent of South America with the soccer that is there too, just to point out one of the most stark disparities.
I'm not necessarily defending Europe here, but
Of course. Oh, Theo.
He's like, I'm not about to be that guy.
I agree with a lot. And everything Tamerra said.
As a European, please go ahead.
No, it's just, I'm just trying to say that like the problem is, and we're kind of banging this drum constantly. We talked about it in CONCACAF, right? Is resources. Like that's what it comes down to. I think Tamerra also brought up this idea of, who made the game, who's calling the shots, which I think is a really smart point and does say a lot about UEFA and FIFA and the history of the World Cup and kind of, although the Women's World Cup arguably maybe has a slightly different history to the Men's World Cup. But again, you're looking at the people that kind of invented the format for qualifying for the World Cup and invented these allocations. So I think there's something to that. But I also think beyond when you take out history, the kind of the resources in the here and now, right? There's just more money going into the teams in Europe. So those teams are going to be more competitive. I think South America, almost to me, feels like the most stark because of the history on the men's side and there being so much great football in South America. But when you look at South American international football, and we'll get into maybe in a bit more detail in a bit, the women's game has really lagged until very recently. And I think the fact that this World Cup is going to be the first Women's World Cup in South America, maybe this is the one that turns the tide. But in a way, I think we've probably seen up until Colombia, right, in 2023, and maybe Colombia a few years ago, I think in 2015, we haven't really seen many big teams, obviously excluding Brazil, who have been to every single World Cup and obviously went to the final in 2007 and have a player some people may have heard of called Marta. You know, there just hasn't been that many good teams coming out of South America, I guess what I'm trying to say. And again, it goes down to resources. But we're in this paradox of like, how do you grow the game? How do you get these confederations and federations to invest when if Europe hoards all the World Cup spots, you're not going to get the investment because confederations want to see the spot in the tournament to know their investment's going somewhere.
The Women's Argentine Federation is light years away from what we've seen with Lionel Messi and the reigning champions of Argentina. Yeah. I don't even want to know what the difference is if you ever looked at investment between two federations like that. Okay, so I think it begs the question a little bit here of, Tamerra makes the point of, yeah, if teams aren't qualifying for the World Cup, the investment is not going to be there. Change is not going to come. So how much responsibility does FIFA have in kind of helping to push the game forward with decisions like this?
Huge responsibility. And if I were to kind of like lobotomize myself from knowing what I actually know about
Please
FIFA.
Don't. We need that beautiful brain of yours.
Sometimes it's like, I wish that I didn't know as much as I know about FIFA because
it's a curse. The knowledge is a curse.
You know, and it affects this kind of conversation. So in a perfect world, I think that there would be people at FIFA who are paying such close attention to women's football globally that they are able to track trends, track trajectories, make informed predictions about where they think the game is going. And whether it's coming as a result of incentivization of different federations, just being more imaginative about the ways in which you can qualify, which I know is something that we're going to talk about because I find it interesting that each of these confederations has a different way of getting into the World Cup. And that carries meaning with it as well. I think that I think that people would be more open to more shifts in the pathway to the World Cup if the shifts actually were informed by the changes in the women's game. And it's funny that we talk about Argentina because if I recall, they had a pretty decent 2023 World Cup. I feel like they were on the cusp of making it into the knockout stages. And what happens if, you kind of mentioned this, Theo, if you know that you have a legitimate chance or there's a fair number of spaces to qualify for 2027, you start working backwards. You start knowing that like the weight of that representation and visibility is often, unfortunately, what spurs these people in power to action. And without that, it can sometimes become twice as hard to get things done. I mean, we've talked about Jamaica already, and I feel like I'm trying to not get back into CONCACAF territory, but I only bring them up to say that even when you have accomplished beyond what is expected of you compared to the investment that you get, even that is not enough to guarantee that you're going to be taken seriously. So I think the stakes are high. Yeah, or
right.
get for sustainability. So the onus is 100% on FIFA to be paying attention to these things, but unfortunately, they're way too reactive. It's almost like they operate from a standpoint of, let's see how much we can get away with doing nothing, and only when, and even then, if people raise concerns, we'll do something. So lots of responsibility, but I'm not holding my breath in terms of action.
And you're absolutely right about Argentina. They did make it to the 2023 Women's World Cup. They lost only 1-0 to Italy in their opener, drew 2-2 to South Africa, and then finally got knocked out of their group with a 2-0 loss to Sweden.
I feel like I'm really playing the bad guy card on this pod, but can I give FIFA a bit of credit?
At your risk.
You're playing the bad European.
Bad European. The expansion to 32 teams in 2023 is massive because it created more pathways. And I'm not obviously like they could have done that years ago, but like when we talk about this paradox and these pathways, we forget how quickly, it's amazing how quickly the women's game has come. And the 2023 World Cup was the first one with 32 teams. And that's what helped give us Zambia making their World Cup debut, Haiti making their World Cup debut, Morocco, really, really important, fun team in that tournament. And I think we're going to see another expansion in 2031, but while we're talking about 2027, this will only be the second World Cup and strangely the last with 32 teams. And so it's about, like you said, Tamerra, who can see that as somewhere where their nation, their confederation is going on that journey and who maybe sees this as a building block, maybe to 2031, where there will be more places available. But I also think with the increase in teams came the increase in the intercontinental playoff. And if we talk about, are the allocations unfair? The intercontinental playoff is interesting because you see teams from different confederations go up against each other and face off, right? And in a way, maybe that's the most fair way of deciding who goes to the tournament. And in that tournament in 2023, we saw Panama and Haiti triumph. And that was really interesting because I think it did give CONCACAF, I know we're not really talking about CONCACAF anymore necessarily, but it gave CONCACAF a moment to say, when we go up against other confederations, look how our kind of next generation of rising nations are coming. So I do think the expansion to 32 teams would be the only, the major credit I would give FIFA. I just wanted to put that out there because I think Philippines would be another one. Great debut nation from the last World Cup. They're obviously going to be going into the Asia Cup as maybe a bit of an underdog next month as well.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned the Asia Cup. Let's talk about what we have going on in the month of March. Asia Cup and the Women's Africa Cup of Nations, both coming up. How big are these tournaments? In general, the scenes, always fun to watch. But when it comes to Women's World Cup, they also serve as World Cup qualifying. So it's really like it's a double whammy.
It is. And I admittedly need to be more intentional about paying attention to Asian Cup tournaments. I think compared to WAFCON, it's like I'm locked in and then I'm following score lines on my phone when it comes to between WAFCON and Asian Cup respectively. But I'm of a few minds of this. I think that it's important for us to remind people the multiple purposes that these tournaments serve, because it's easy enough for any international tournament to just focus on the spectacle of that. It's such an important way to track the growth of various national teams within that confederation. It's usually, there's always going to be an upset story, a Cinderella story, these triumphant sort of tales that make you fall in love with a moment or a tournament. But I feel a type of way at the same time about the weight of significance that each of these tournaments have, which is not the case for the Euros. It's not the case for CONCACAF. It's not, certainly, especially now, not the case for CONMEBOL either. And I think about what that means in the context of the growth of the women's game. Theo, I know you also have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned CONMEBOL because, again, while we're handing out credit to the men in suits and women in suits out there making decisions, it is cool to see CONMEBOL moving for the first time to a league phase and not following suit with Asia and Africa, where the tournament holds the weight of the qualifying. I think something I was talking about Tamerra with this, the reason I find it so frustrating is from a storytelling point of view, from an entertainment point of view, and that's part of the reason, why we're doing this podcast. Qualifying is a story and a journey in its own right. And when that is tied to a trophy like the Asian Cup or the Women's African Cup of Nations, it sort of dilutes what's special about a team's journey to the World Cup. Like, something shouldn't have to hold both. And that's what I think for me is extra frustrating about what's happening in Asia and Africa, albeit it does mean next month we are going to have some absolutely massive football matches.
I was going to say there really is like a double-edged sword to the consolidation. On the one hand, you get sort of more of a saturated match day potentially, but you lose something by not being able to stretch that out and allow WAFCON and Asian Cup to just be WAFCON and Asian Cup, and then allowing qualifying to be qualifying.
As people look ahead and start to get ready for these two big tournaments, just weeks away at this point, who should people be keeping their eyes on when you look at Asia and Africa respectively?
Sorry,
I'll go
I
first.
feel like
go. North Korea. I think we've got to talk about North Korea. They have been the absolute stars of the youth international football world. They won the 2024 Youth World Cup, and we did a great podcast about that, I guess almost a couple of years ago now, with Meg and Tamerra, with Heather O'Reilly, who was there. And, I think they are a really interesting team. They haven't played in the Asia Cup since 2010, when they went to the final and lost to Australia, who are the hosts this March in 2026. They obviously hosted the last World Cup. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what North Korea can pull out. We know they have fantastic young players. We know, strangely enough, they did invest a lot in women's football in the 2000s before it was cool in a lot of other nations. So they deserve credit there. But they're also a country politically, culturally, in the sporting world we don't really see. So they are a bit of an unknown, North Korea, but they are back in the Asian Cup, and I think it's going to be fascinating. And then obviously the hosts, Australia, coming off the 2023 World Cup semi-final appearance and their best ever finish. I think it's going to be amazing to see the crowds and the country get behind them. The Matildas are so beloved down under, and for them to be hosting this tournament, I think it's going to be absolutely massive. They actually haven't won it since 2010. I think it's been a huge thing to get off their back, is to be Asian Cup champions again and obviously qualify for the next World Cup. So I think those are probably the two teams I'm most excited to see. I mentioned the Philippines. They were a really, really fun debutant in 2023 as well. Really interested to see how they get on. T, I'll let you talk about who you're excited to see at WAFCON.
Yeah. I will say that I need to force Japan into the chat there with Asian Cup.
They're the favorites.
They're the favorites. And I just think that between the development of younger players, between the opportunities that a lot of Japanese players are and have had, not only to play abroad, specifically in these bigger leagues in Europe and the US with the NWSL, but the impact that they are making on their respective teams. They also, in very different ways to Haiti that I mentioned earlier, have a lot of responsibility and a lot of possibility to really move the dial in terms of the way that we even discuss Asian women's football. So Japan definitely is in the mix for me, in addition to, I think Australia probably has the most to prove, because on paper you have a certain expectation of what they're able to accomplish, and I wasn't aware of how long it had been since they'd won an Asian Cup. So, WAFCON, my goodness. We have to start with the Group C, Group of Death, with Egypt, Nigeria, Zambia, and Malawi.
How is that legal?
That's what I've been asking that ever since the draw, Theo. It doesn't make sense. It's not fair. That doesn't make any sense. The people deserve better. Malawi's first WAFCON, first opportunity to qualify for a World Cup. The Shawinga sisters, hopefully, will both be present. That is a bit still up in the air because of Temwa's health. But it feels unfair that those three specific teams, Nigeria, reigning WAFCON champions, 10-time winners, Zambia, the team that always makes things interesting, of course, with Barbara Banda, Rachel Kundananji, talk about a journey of a national team, which was on full display at the 2023 World Cup, all of the challenges that they're up against. And then debutantes Malawi, and then Egypt. Sorry, I don't have that many qualifiers about Egypt right now, but it feels unfair. I also, at the same time, am excited to see, because we, for reasons that are too complex to get into on this pod, but if you listen to past episodes of our WAFCON coverage, you'll know that we just had a WAFCON last summer. And I think that there's something interesting about, and unique, obviously, about witnessing this kind of tournament in consecutive years, not even within a full calendar year of each other. Because I think also about teams like Ghana, Ivory Coast, who didn't even compete in the last WAFCON, but qualified for this one. Shout out Rose Monkwasi of the Washington Spirit, who we can expect to also ball out. There are a lot of teams that were really knocking on the door in the last campaign that I think are really going to benefit from, as we said earlier, the fact that they already know that they're going to be competing. Well, didn't already know at the time, but knowing that they're competing in another WAFCON so soon is sort of like, okay, these federations cannot take their foot up off the gas. And so I think it's going to be a combination of, from sort of the top of the table, is Morocco finally going to do the thing? They're hosting again. They are, I don't know if they're necessarily favorites anymore, but this is a country that will not rest until their national teams are lifting trophies. We saw what happened with the men earlier this year. Now the focus is on the women. But then you also have, is Botswana going to ruin anybody's dreams? What is Senegal cooking? I think from top to bottom, there are a lot of really compelling stories. And I know for sure that by the end of WAFCON, we're going to be talking about some of these teams very, very differently.
Okay, so if you're like, oh, that all sounds so fun, how the heck do I watch all of it? Women's AFCON is going to take place from March 17th to April 3rd. That is in Morocco. And then the AFC Women's Asian Cup, that is kicking off in just 1 week's time, March 1st to the 21st. In Australia. Okay, so I feel like we touched on South America a decent amount. New Zealand is the only team to ever qualify out of Oceania, so we're going to move on from that. We will finish here, Theo, with UEFA. Take us through some of the biggest storylines right now, key dates when we put a bow on this World Cup qualifying conversation.
Yeah, UEFA is an interesting one. We just talked about Asia and Africa, where it's a little bit more simple because they're going to have a 12 team tournament in Asia, a 16 team tournament in Africa, and obviously you go through the group stage, you knock out, and you eventually kind of the semi-finalists more or less kind of become your qualifiers. UEFA's doing it a little bit differently. They're going for a pretty big Nations League format. I think it's around 50 nations are going to compete in a league that's split into A, B, and C. And essentially, you'll get split into like a little 4-team group and you'll just play that group. And then the winner of that mini group will then move on. The top 4 A league teams will move on to the World Cup. And then the 32 remaining teams will play in a playoff. That'll get down to 16, which will get down to 8, which is how the rest of UEFA is decided. So if you're still with me, listener, what that means is we've got a lot of European football to come. They play 2-legged knockout games. So we'll see once the first Nations League form round is finished, we'll then go to the round of 32 will be 2-legged, round of 16 will be 2-legged. And I think what we're going to see is kind of a hangover from the Euros, who needs to be recycled and refreshed and who maybe can build on a great Euros. Switzerland are a really interesting team in this respect because we saw them get a lot of new young players and all this excitement of being hosts. And they look really set up for success. They did change their manager. They got rid of Pearson Haga, who now has obviously gone to Haiti. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens to them in this. I also want to shout out Serbia, who have been promoted to the A-League. So in a way, this is the interesting thing about if you do a Nations League format. You, in a way, get rewarded for doing well, as Serbia have been in kind of friendlies and qualifiers. They were knocked out in the UEFA Euros qualifier last round, so I think to Sweden. So they very nearly made the Euros, but obviously they came up against Sweden, who are a very good side. And they're now in the A-League, which gives them a better seeding when the UEFA goes to the 2-legged home and away knockout. So I think there's interesting teams like Serbia who are kind of on a rising a high. We obviously saw Wales make their Euros debut. Could they transfer that into a World Cup debut? I think there's a lot of interesting nations. And then you got the big ones, right? Like England, double European champions, never won a World Cup, went to the final in 2023. They will be thinking, okay, can we top our group and qualify for the World Cup without having to go play these 2-legged qualification playoff rounds? Let's just get it out of the way. Let's qualify early. June 2026, we could have a spot in Brazil. They're going to have to beat Spain, their old nemesis, to get through. So that's really, really interesting and fun. And I think it's kind of an exciting time for European football because of the Nations League format, you do get a lot of big nations going up against each other in the A League, the B League, and the C League. They rank it by your quality. So the A teams are all ranked together in this early round facing off against each other. So you're going to get a lot of big games. So it's a really interesting format in Europe, which I think means it's quite long. It obviously starts this week and it will go through to November, December. But I think you'll see a lot of big games, a lot of twists and turns, and a lot of teams are going to be fighting for their lives. Like I said, it's only 4 European teams automatically qualify. The rest have to go to the playoffs. So England, double European champion, could well be in that playoff come November.
Okay, so there you have it. That is how the chips will begin to fall as we all eye the 2027 World Cup in Brazil. Tamerra, Theo, thank you so much for all of your insights from all of the federations and all of the countries across the world. You make it sound easy, so I really appreciate you both.
Well, I'm going to go take a nap because making things look easy is very hard. But it's good that we have this sort of, we were talking about setting the table to prepare for this World Cup. And I think just between how many more teams are going to be involved, the earlier we can start planning for this party, the better. And I love planning parties with you guys.
Hopefully we'll be doing this all on a beach in Rio de Janeiro one day in 2027.
Now you're talking. All right. Thank you both. What would I do without Tamerra and Theo? I know it feels daunting to get set for this World Cup, but don't worry, we are in this together, and we are going to hold each other's hands every step of the way. So hopefully you're feeling more excited, more focused, more organized as we all get ready for Brazil 2027. And we're going to be continuing to do this and keep you posted on the updates from around the world here on Full Time. All right, before we get out of here today, for our Black History Month trivia question on the day, we asked you, who was the player that in 2013 scored an iconic goal for the U.S. women's national team in a friendly against Canada at BMO Field in Toronto, and then celebrated by placing one finger over her mouth and shushing the crowd? The answer is Sydney Leroux from A Sunny Day at BMO Stadium. Yes, the famous shush goal celebration that came when they beat them 3-0.
Goes to one back, and now Leroux is in the clear. Can she do it for the US? Round the keeper she goes, and Sydney Leroux completes a splendid afternoon's work for the United States, trying to silence the Canada crowd she grew up with.
Okay, that does it for our show today here on Full Time. We'd love to hear from you, as always, so send us an email at fulltime@theathletic.com or shoot us a DM at TA Fulltime. Did you know that The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to provide free best-in-class coverage of women's sports? That's right, so go check out the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. My name is Jillian Sakovits. That does it for our show today. A huge, huge thank you again to our podcast producer and co-host today, Theo Lloyd Hughes, our video producer, Leah Griffin, and our esteemed executive producer, Emily Olsen. We'll see you later this week.